Hello, this is the Jay Show, and this is Dr. Jay Smith here in London. We're going to be talking about something that's, well, I'm going to have Beth Grove, who is my expert on gender issue. You did your master's degree in gender of Islam. This is your area of expertise, and we're going to be talking about something that is rather controversial, maybe certainly difficult for Muslims to hear. What is it we're going to talk about today?
Yeah, we're going to be zeroing in on a Quranic verse, chapter 2 of the Quran. And there's a very rather troubling verse in there. And a lot of Muslims themselves have trouble with this particular verse. And it says in verse 230 of the second chapter of the Quran, where if a man were to divorce his wife, and he would have said talaq on 3 separate occasions to his wife, that means he divorces her, and then she is absolutely divorced. In order to come back to that husband, to be reunited to that first husband, she has to go and find another man, marry another man, consummate the marriage with that man.
For those who don't know what consummate means.
To sleep with that man.
To have sex with the man.
And then to be divorced by that man in order for her to then return to the first husband.
Now, you've known about this for years. In fact, you covered this in your thesis, in your master's. But the reason we're bringing it up now is because something happened a few weeks ago on April the 5th. There was a documentary that was made here in Britain by BBC, and it was put also on the website. That's where I came across it, and I was gobsmacked to see that they would even talk about this issue here in Britain. And this is the documentary here. We're just going to hold up. This is actually a picture from the documentary, and this is actually goes and unpacks what they do in the documentary. And they mention that here in Britain there are quite a few women who get divorced, which is normal, and the way to get divorced is just by, if they call it triple talaq. Triple talaq means they say talaq, talaq, talaq. The man does 3 times, and when he says that, she's divorced, right? It can be over 3 periods, or it can be immediately. What was interesting in this documentary, they had a woman there who had got a text from her husband saying that he wanted to divorce her. They had had an argument the day before. He had actually beat her up quite a few times, and so she was getting fed up with him. She already had 3 kids through them. She still loved him, and she was at her parents' house when she got a text from the husband saying talak, talak, talak. And she looked up, and her father was sitting right there, and her father says, "You're now divorced." Because once you say it the 3rd time, then that's final. And it's called the triple talaq. And she says, "Well, what do I do now?" Because she'd still like to get back with her husband. So the father says, "You've got to go down to the mosque, and you've got to go and tell the imam there at the mosque what has happened. And what they will do then is they will give you a halal marriage. Halal marriage it's called. Halala, which is rather odd because halal.
Allowed. It is allowed.
Permissible. Permissible.
Permissible.
So this is halal marriage, a permissible marriage. You have to do a halal marriage, which means that you've got to marry another man. And on the documentary, they didn't say where this came from. They just said this is being done by quite a few Muslims. Then when to be married to the other man, you've got to actually, the imam will provide a man. Usually it's another man from the community. What was happening, according to this documentary, is that a lot of these other men that were used to provide the sexual service for the woman doesn't have to then annul that divorce her, or annul the marriage anytime soon. It's supposed to be done immediately, but many of the men were holding on, and they were saying, "No, this could be a month or 2 months, as long as I need you, as long as I need you as a woman." And so what was happening is that the imams were taking it upon their own selves to do the halal marriages. And so in a number of mosques here in Britain now, they have a anteroom, another room off the side of the office where the imam is, and there's a bed there, and they will go to the bed and they will then have sex. It has to be a penetrative sex. He will then come out and then sign a divorce right in front of the wife, and then she is then free to go back to her original husband. Now, they were charging, the imams were charging anywhere from £1,000 up to £2,500.
Which, of course, is Islamic in the sense that you need to be able to pay a bride price. That's also in the Quran, the mahr. You have to pay this price so that you can actually marry a woman in the first place. So that would be normative in Islamic marriage.
Except this is the bride paying the price. The husband doesn't pay the price.
Yes.
In this case, it's all completely opposite. Yeah. So here is the bride. Already she's the one that's divorced, Because it's the husband that said talak, not the wife. Wife doesn't say talak, do they? What does the wife do?
The wife has to go to the law court. She has to go to the Sharia law, and then she has to approach the Sharia law, and she has to ask and go through arbitration and ask for a divorce. It's called khul, and if she asks for the divorce, she usually has to give her bride price back to the husband.
Maher,
so
she
is often left without any maintenance. She is left without anything to support herself.
Beth, in this case, it's completely the other way around. She doesn't keep her dowry. In fact, she is the one that has to go and pay. And we found out what was fascinating is they did an undercover film. The woman posing as needing of a halal marriage. She goes to a restaurant, and there's the fellow. He's been pixelated out, so you can't see his face. He's from the Pakistani community here in Britain, and he is going to be the man that does the halal marriage for her. And he's saying, "Listen, we'll come and we'll go to a hotel and we'll book a room there. You will pay for the room, obviously. She'll have to pay for the room, and it'll cost between $2,500. It can be as much as £6,000." He was saying, and he was saying that he could. And she said, "Well, how long does this go?" And he said, "Well, until we decide, maybe a few months." So he was already intimating that this would continue on, this marriage would continue on for a few months until he got tired of her.
That would certainly feed into the muta and misya marriage practice that's in Islam, that's also supported by Muhammad in the Sirah Rasulullah in his biography, where when they were at war, they were able to then take on other wives temporarily because they were away from their wives now. And that practice still happens in both Sunni and Shia Islam. In Shia Islam, it's called muta marriage, and in Sunni Islam, it's called misya marriage.
Okay, so now we have this practice, halala marriage, or nikah halala is the way it's now. You see it. If you put nikah halala on YouTube, you will find quite a few videos.
Here in the West, you'll find both the secular press and also modern Muslims or Muslims who've been born and raised in Britain. They're trying to say that this practice has nothing to do with Islam. That this practice is not found in the Quran. This practice is cursed by Muhammad and Allah and has nothing to do with Islam. And that's why we need to address it.
And there's this scholar. I'll just put up her picture here. You can see this scholar here. Her name is Khola Hassan. They brought her on to this onto the BBC, and they asked her about this, and she was aghast. She was indignant, and she said very clearly that this is illegal. This is not Islamic. It has nothing to do with Islam. And she was the expert, which is fascinating to me, because the man who was in charge of the BBC never asked her, well, then where does this come from? If it has nothing to do with Islam, if this is anathema, if it's so abhorrent to even her, then how is it that so many Muslims are practicing it? Why is it in Pakistan it's quite normal? And why is it here in Britain? There are a number of mosques now where the imams are participating in these halal marriages so that the woman can go back to her previous husband, her first husband.
We certainly know that later exegetes who translate the Quran in the last few hundred years find this practice abhorrent. They don't support this practice.
Before you get to that, it's fascinating to me. There's nothing in this BBC documentary about the Quran.
But that's what happens whenever Islam ever hits the news, be it something to do with a terrorist attack, be it to be an abuse against a woman or halal marriage and so on. Our media outlets don't understand the source or the roots of where these practices come from.
And for those of you who are watching this, I would encourage you to go up to BBC and just put in "the women who sleep with a stranger to save their marriage." That's the title of the article that's on BBC. Go, you won't find it. In fact, when I first saw it on Wednesday night last week, it was there at 2 o'clock in the morning, actually Thursday morning. I quickly pulled it down, downloaded it, and sent it out to all of our team. The next morning, 5 hours later, about 7 o'clock in the morning, I went online to see if it was there. It had been on the front page on BBC. You know where they have the most popular stories? Yes. It was the most popular story, even above Trump. It out-Trumped Trump. And I was fascinated that this was right at the top of the list. When I went the next morning, Thursday morning around 7 o'clock, I looked and looked. I couldn't find it. It wasn't on the front page. It was no longer on the most popular stories. Popular stories do not go out of fashion that quick. Yeah. So I had to actually type it in. The women who sleep with a stranger to save their marriage, to find it again. So it's still there. And those of you who do not trust me and want to make sure that this is still there, go and look at it and see as you read through the article and see as you look at the documentary, because it gives you a URL to go to where you can find the documentary. See if they say anything about the Quran, or if they support it or even intimate that this may come from Islam. What they're saying is this is nothing to do with Islam, almost intimating that this is nothing more than a custom that comes out of Pakistan, one of those colloquial customs that people bring with them when they come across the seas, they come to the West.
Now, I understand the secular press saying that because those who have no religion don't understand that those of us who do have religion, we look to our book. For the Muslim, that is the Quran. For the Christian, that is the New Testament. And we look to our man. For Muslims, that is Muhammad. And for those of us who are Christian, it's God who came to us to walk with us, and that's the Lord Jesus Christ. So we look to the book and the man, as you always say. And the secular press doesn't understand that whole idea.
But Khola Hassan should understand.
Yes,
that.
Muslims should understand that.
For the Quranic councils and the Quranic courts, she should have known where to look. Why is it you know this, Beth? You have this as part of your thesis. And where is it you went to in the Quran to unpack this?
Chapter 2, verse 230. In fact, it's quite interesting when you look at the Quran that the whole teaching on divorce comes before marriage. Chapter 4 is the chapter you go to on marriage. Chapter 2 is the chapter you go to on divorce. We're
going to take and actually look at and open up the Quran. I want to read from the Quran to really see what it says. So I'm going to open up to Surah 2, Ayah 230. This is from Hilali and Khan, starting with 230 and then going on to 231. So if a husband divorces his wife, he cannot after that remarry her until after she has married another husband and he has divorced her. In that case, there is no blame on either of them if they reunite, provided they feel that they can keep the limits ordained by Allah. Such are the limits ordained by Allah, which he makes plain to those who know, and Allah is exalted in power. A divorce is only permissible twice. After that, the parties should either hold together on equitable terms or separate with kindness. It is not lawful for you to take back any of your gifts, except when both parties fear that they would be unable to keep the limits ordained by Allah. Now, it's fascinating. That's Surah 2, Ayah 230 and 231. So, irrevocably means the third time, the third talaq.
Yes.
That's the third time.
So, halala comes into play after the third divorce.
What I want you to do now is I want you to go back and see what the earliest exegetes, how do they unpack it? And let's start with Ibn Abbas. Ibn Abbas, and the dates for him are 687 AD. Go ahead and read what he says there.
So he says very clearly, he says, Allah went on with his saying, divorce must be pronounced twice, saying, and he hath divorced her, and the third time, then she is not lawful to him thereafter. After the third divorce, until she hath wedded another husband, and their marriage must be consummated, then the other husband divorces her. It is no sin then if the first husband and the woman come back together again.
So it's very clear here that in 687, now we don't really know if this really is an original, because 687 there's nothing that's that early. Nonetheless, from the very beginning, it is very clear that after you say the third talaq, you no longer are married, you have to leave your husband, and you must go to a second husband, and he must consummate it. He must have sex with her. Now let's move to the 8th century. Let's go to the Hanafi manual, and you've got Hanafi right there.
Yes, so I just want to see that we're reading from the original sources, and this is the Hanafi manual in English, of course. And if you want to check, you can go to the Arabic to double check. Let me read what it says in the Hanafi manual.
The date for this is 767, so we're late 8th century.
And it's under the title of the legislation of remarriage, i.e. halala. So it talks that if the divorce is pronounced thrice for the free woman or twice for the slave woman, so the slave woman can be divorced indefinitely twice, for the free woman 3 times, then she is not lawful for the divorcing husband until she marries a husband other than him in a valid marriage, and he consummates the marriage with her, thereafter divorces her or dies, leaving her a widow.
So in the 8th century, it's still very clear that in order to get back with your first husband, you have to marry another husband, consummated. He has to divorce you, and you come back again.
And of course, it goes on to talk about adolescent boys can be seen as adults. So you can sleep with an adolescent boy in order to have a halal marriage.
So the second husband could even be an adolescent boy.
Yes, and also a sexual intercourse of a master with his slave woman does not render her lawful, because we know that masters are allowed in Islam to sleep with their slave women. So that means that's not a halal marriage if it's the master. But there is a condition put into place, and this is where later exegetes focus in on. They say when someone marries her with the condition of rendering halal, so if your intention is to make her halal, then it is disapproved. And if he divorces after having sexual intercourse with her, she becomes lawful for the first husband.
Oh dear, okay.
So the intention is what later exegetes focus on. But again, that's not what the Quran teaches. This is what...
Let's move on, because now we're still in, we want to move up to the 9th century. We're going to go with Shafi, with the Shafi school of law. These are fiqh. This is not hadith. This is not tafsir. This is not takhriq. This is not sirah. This is fiqh. For those of you who don't know, these are the 4 schools, law schools. You have the Shafi, the Hanafi, Hanbali, and Maliki. So now we're going to go to the Shafi school. What do they say in 820? And here it gets, you want me to read it as a male? Probably better if I as a male read it.
Yes, please do. And I'm just going to hold it up. It's Al-Shafi Risala. This is the English version. You can check it in the Arabic.
Okay. When a free man has pronounced a threefold divorce, the divorced wife is unlawful for him to remarry until she has married another husband in a valid marriage, and the new husband has copulated with her, which at minimum means that the head of his erect penis fully enters her vagina. Now, that's hard for us to read. It's not something you normally talk about. They're getting very specific here.
Yes.
It has to be a full copulation. It can't just be a casual one. So it's very clear that there must be sexual intercourse.
Absolutely.
In this case, Shafi is very, very clear. When a husband divorces his wife with a threefold divorce during his deathbed illness, she does not inherit the material. So even, that's interesting, because Shafi goes on and says basically that if, for instance, you don't like your wife and you realize that you may have more than one wife, you can say talaq on your deathbed and she gets none of the inheritance. So you can even use talaq as a means of manipulation as to where your inheritance goes.
Yeah.
Horrendous,
yes,
when you stop and think what that means to the woman.
Yeah.
Let's move on. So we've done 820. Now let's move to 870. We're still in the 9th century, in the late 9th century, and we're coming to Al-Bukhari. Now this is the hadith. Al-Bukhari, you're going to do Sahih Al-Bukhari, and you're going to use volume 7.
So Sahih Bukhari, volume 7. Again, check the Arabic and the English. And this has both Arabic and English, so we can read both. I'm going to read it in the English. And we're looking at we're looking at the Book of Divorce, and it is hadith number 5265. And this is narrated by Aisha. Jay, that is very important, because Aisha is considered authoritative, especially when it comes to issues on women.
She's the favorite wife of Muhammad.
Yes. And when it comes to issues on women, she is important.
Considered to be the authority on this. Okay, so that's why you're reporting this out.
And remember, we said earlier that you always go back to the book and the man. So now we're going to go to an example of Muhammad. What did Muhammad think about all this? So we've looked at some of the Islamic law. Now we're going to go to Muhammad himself. And
these are his sayings.
Yes, this is a
story. Preserved by
story.
Bukhari and Muslim. Whether we like that or not, whether we agree with that or not, Muslims believe that these are sahih. That means they're perfect. You do not criticize, you do not critique.
And certainly this is an authoritative hadith. So narrated by Aisha, a man divorced his wife and she married another man who proved to be impotent, and divorced her. She could not get her satisfaction from him, and after a while he divorced her. Then she came to the Prophet and said, "O Allah's Messenger, my first husband divorced me, and then I married another man who entered upon me to consummate his marriage, but he proved to be impotent," i.e. he couldn't actually consummate the marriage, he couldn't sleep with her, "and did not approach me except once, during which he benefited nothing from me. Can I remarry my first husband in this case?" Allah's Messenger said, "It is unlawful to marry your first husband till the other husband consummates his marriage with you."
Regardless of whether he's impotent or not, you still go ahead with the sexual act.
You have to be able to have slept with that man, and this is according to Muhammad himself, in order for her to be divorced and then to go back to the first husband.
So I hope people are watching. Have you noticed we've now gone to the 7th century, we've gone to the 8th century, we're now into the 9th century. We're going to move now into the 11th century, and we're going to pick it up with Al-Qushayri. Al-Qushayri 1071, and it's right here on the page here, and I'll just read it. "A man finds it unbearable that his wife should marry another." So here suddenly there's a caution. If he divorces her, she shall not be lawful to him after that until she marries another husband. If he divorces her, then neither of them would be at fault to return to each other. And then he says, a man finds it unbearable that his wife should marry another. So God prevents him from choosing separation with the intention of keeping her from remarrying. He explains that she will not be lawful for him once he has separated from her until she does what he would find unbearable, and that is a second marriage. So he will be cautious as much as he is able in initiating divorce. Now suddenly there's a caution put in.
Yes.
And I'm saying, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Where's this caution coming from? Until you read the next paragraph. Take a look at the next paragraph. The allusion in it is that love's capture of the heart makes the endurance of every misery easy. For if after separating, the spouses feel regret for their lost union, and it's very flowery, and suddenly I realize can't be from the 11th century. This has been redacted back onto Al-Qushayri. I would love to see if Al-Qushayri ever said this, because this is the first time that you're seeing a caution. Be careful. Don't go beyond the second talaq, because if you go beyond the second talaq, she's going to have to go with another man. You and the first male, you don't want to do the third time, and it's assuming that this is done over a long period of time.
Yes, and certainly later exegetes and the Muslim friends I've talked to recently all say this is a caution, that Allah put it in place for a caution, as a way to try get around this rather difficult verse.
Right. Now we get into the 14th century, 1373. We are with Ibn Kathir. Everybody likes Ibn Kathir. He is the favorite of anybody that I've come across. All over the world, they like to go to Ibn Kathir because he's the one that really unpacks the Quran. What does Ibn Kathir say in 1373?
So we're going to read Ibn Kathir, and it's translated from the Arabic. Allah said, it gives you the Arabic, and then we're going to read it in English now. And if he has divorced her the third time, then she is not lawful to him thereafter until she has married another husband. It goes on again, it starts unpacking the verse bit by bit. And it says very clearly, this ayah indicates that if the man divorces his wife for the third time after he divorced her twice, then she no longer is allowed for her to be married. And then until she's married another. And Ibn Kathir goes on to talk about how she must consummate the marriage, because it talks about here, you have Allah's messenger said, when in relation to whether they consummate the marriage or not, Allah's messenger said, no, until he enjoys her usaila, so her sexual relations. And Al-Bukhari also reports this hadith, says Ibn Kathir. So they're accepting that Muhammad said you must have sexual relations with the second husband in order to go back to the first husband.
What's fascinating is even here he refers back to Muslim and Bukhari and Sahih Bukhari. So Sahih Muslim and Sahih Bukhari. He's referring back to the 9th century. He's going back and is realigning what he believes with that which the hadith writers, compilators write in the 9th century. He
certainly reports a similar story, potentially a different one or similar story, about a lady, the wife of Rifa'ah, who also was divorced, and there was a very interesting scenario with this wife who also married a man. He was not able to consummate the marriage, the second man, and as a result Muhammad said you cannot remarry your first husband until you have slept with the second husband.
Okay, so here now in the 14th century he's now revisiting, going back to the 9th century, going back to basically what we've already read. Al-Qushayri is interesting. The fact that in the 11th century he seems to be asking and looking for caution. Now we move on to the 15th century and we go with Al-Jalalain. Al-Jalalain, 1459. And he basically says exactly what Bukhari and Muslim say. He says this: if he, the husband, divorces her after the 2 utterances of divorce. Now he doesn't give a time limit here. It could be immediate. Have you noticed none of them have said a long time limit? The only one that intimates there might be a time limit between the first and second and third is Al-Qushayri, 1078, sorry. So he says, she shall not be lawful to him after that, after the 3rd utterance of divorce, until she marries another husband who has sexual intercourse with her, as reported by the 2 sheikhs, Bukhari, again referring back to Bukhari. They go back to Bukhari and Muslim again. If he, the second husband, divorces her, then neither of them would be at fault, that is the woman and her first husband, to return to each other in wedlock. Now, can you see there's a problem here? We now are right back to the 9th century, yet this is the 15th century, 1459, midway through the 15th century.
Because, Jay, depending on who the exegete is, it all depends on who is really reading their original stories, who goes back to the Book of the Man. The ones who refer back to Muhammad and what Muhammad said, and also to their own book, the Quran, those are the ones that go back to the more traditional practice of halala.
Oh, this is fascinating. Now, I want to take you back to this last Sunday. We were on the ladder a week ago Sunday.
Speaking to crowds of Muslims.
Crowds of Muslims. And you can all, those of you who don't want to go, just go up on Fender Film and take a look at what happened on at Speaker's Corner down in Hyde Park. When we got up on the ladder and introduced this, immediately one of the Muslims standing right at the foot of the ladder says, no, 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 this is illegal. Every Muslim knows this is illegal. And we responded, okay, in the 21st century, it is illegal. You're right. And I would suggest that the majority of Muslims who are listening to us right now would say this is illegal. Why do they say this is illegal?
Well, I mean, they're disturbed by it, but also later exegetes like Maududi from Pakistan and Asia, they clearly try to discredit this. They say, no, that this particular saying of Muhammad or hadith, it talks about the curse of Allah. That's how they try to get out of it, that it's actually a curse. But if you read the earliest sources or the earliest literature of Islam, there's nothing in there about the actual practice of halala being a curse. The curse that they might be referring to...
Before you go any further, let's just read what Sayyid Abdul Allah Maududi says. He was born in 1903 and then he died in 1979. So he's actually within our lifetime. Very popular in India, and then of course during the partition in 1947, sorry, he then moved to Pakistan out of India. He was from Deoband, not too far from where I grew up. And he moved and he started the Jamaat-e-Islami, the very, very big group and that has now all over the world. And he says this: authentic traditions warn against any prearranged scheme that a certain man should marry a certain divorced woman with the understanding that he would divorce her again to enable the former husband to remarry his divorced wife. This shall be an unlawful act, and such a marriage shall be no marriage at all, but adultery. And the woman shall not become the lawful wife of the first husband by such a prearranged scheme. Hadar Ali ibn Masud, Abu Huraira, and Uqba ibn Amir all relate the tradition to the effect that the Holy Prophet cursed all the persons who indulge in such devices. I want to be very clear.
The early exegetes do not show Muhammad cursing those who did halala. The only thing they can maybe come up with is if it's is your intent, if it's the prearranged scheme in order for her to go back to the first husband. That's the only thing you can find out in some of the later exegetes. But the Quran itself does not support such a practice, and Muhammad himself, according to Sahih Bukhari, does not support such a practice.
So really, when this lady Khola Hassan said this, and the man who wrote this, the man who did this article, Athar Ahmad out of BBC, he worked for BBC. Again, I think he's a Pakistani. Both Ahmad and also Hassan, the two of them, really do believe that this is adultery, really do believe that this is heinous, really do believe that this is not Islamic, really do believe that it's not Islamic, because they would be going to Maududi. They would be going to the last century, the 20th century exegetes. And in the 20th century, especially because this is caused such a furore around the Western world, because of the contact with the West, and I would say because of their contact with Christianity, being in India, the contact with the British Raj and everything that has implied, the implications of that, you can see why Maududi has considered this to be anathema, that this is adultery, that this is a curse, that Muhammad never did it. That's the narrative they have to go with. So people like Hassan and Ahmed, the fellow that did this documentary, I can understand why they would come to this conclusion, as did the man at the foot of the ladder. He was very clear that this is wrong. He was very clear that this is heinous.
Muhammad clearly supports halala, and as does the Quran. Muhammad taught that certainly the wife of Rifa'ah must go back to, must consummate the marriage with the second husband before she can go back to the first. So we know Muhammad supported halala marriage. When people try to say it's a curse, it's because of what this does to the woman, what it does to the marriage, and also the idea that it becomes a prearranged scheme or it's adultery. That may be where the idea of a curse comes in play. But Muhammad doesn't seem to talk about that. Muhammad says, yes, you must, to put it in a little nutshell, Muhammad does support halala marriage. He does support that practice. He doesn't talk about the practice or call it a curse, but he does support the practice of halala.
Ibn Abbas, Sahih Muslim, Al-Bukhari, Ibn Kathir, Jalalain, they all support.
Schools of law.
All of them, the Hanbali and the Shafi schools, they all support halal marriages. Only Kushairi that we could find from 1078, which looks more like a redaction because it's such flowery language, and then of course Maududi in the last century. So can you understand the difficulty? Remember what we said on the ladder. We turned toward this man and we said to this man, okay, if you really believe that that it is adultery, and you really believe that this is illegal and this is a curse, then what is it doing in the Quran?
Yes.
What's it doing in this book? What are you going to do with these verses? What are you going to do with this verse? Should we tear it out? Should we get rid of it? Are you going to therefore not pay attention to it? You can't. It's there. It's black and white in the Quran.
And are you going to go against Allah himself? This is supposed to be the eternal book of Islam. Muslims say it's the eternal word of God. Therefore, are they going against Allah's eternal word? And that's a very dangerous thing to do if you're a Muslim. And we would say that these types of verses show really the handprint of human beings,
Beth,
because this is not a moral God.
I'm so glad that we have a real moral God.
Yes.
I'm so glad we don't have verses like that in the Bible. I'm so glad that we don't even have to have this kind of discussion when we talk about Jesus Christ.
We go back to our Lord and our book.
Is there anything that you can even come close to that could conceivably come close to what we're talking about here?
Not at all. Jesus in the New Testament puts marriage, absolutely, it's so valuable. It is very difficult to divorce in Christianity. It's certainly, if there is immorality, there is place for divorce. But in Christianity, marriage is put on such an important place because God knows how divorce destroys families, how it hurts human beings. And so God talks about how marriage means that a man and a woman come together and they become one flesh, and it becomes a picture of Christ, the Lord Jesus Christ, and his relationship with the church. This intimate, deep relationship that a man and a husband and a wife have together actually signifies the kind of relationship God has with his people.
Ephesians 5:25 says that, and we can go right to the very beginning in Genesis 2, which talks about a man and a woman come together to become one. The two become one. And this is right through Jesus' references. He references it over and over again, compares himself as a husband to his wife, and that a husband should be willing to die for his wife in Ephesians 5. We see in 1 Corinthians 7 the whole ethos of what a marriage is about, and that a husband's body is equal to a wife's body.
But more than that,
go
Jay,
together.
when you look at halal marriage, it seems to imply that Islamic marriage, the main core theme of Islamic marriage is purely just sex. Now, that's important in marriage, absolutely, but is it the main point? No, it's one of the gifts of marriage, but it's not the main point.
Okay, we need to stop it there, but this is so good. I hope you're listening to what Beth and I have brought up today. For Muslims, this is going to be difficult to hear. But remember, you don't have to stop with this book. In fact, don't use this book. It's got lots of problems. This is just one of them. I'm so glad that we can come back to the Bible in the person of Jesus Christ and know what real marriage is about. This is Jay here in London. This is the Jay Show. Over and out.